Welcome to this next video series on conveying the importance of your work through your scientific writing. This video is going to be on how to diagnose and fix problems related to not sufficiently relating your work to your reader. So just like the other videos, we're going to go through both research papers and grant proposals, show you what to look for and how to fix it. If you're ready to get going, let's get started. So with our research papers, we're going to start right at the beginning and look at our abstract to make sure our abstract is sufficiently related to a reader. So again, I'm going to pull the same story I've used for several other videos on working with a student who is developing new radar-based methods for studying bird migration. And he was using this as the broad statement that was directly relating his work to the readers, that basically there was this need for new radar-based methods for bird migration. And me, who does not study birds or bird migration or radars, had no idea that this was maybe true. So just starting his paper with a statement of there is need for these new methods, I was like, is there? Because this statement on his part assumes that the reader already knows that this is a problem that needs to be solved. And this is where we can sometimes run into trouble with readers not understanding the importance of our work. If we are expecting them to start our paper agreeing with us on a major assumption that we're making about why our work is important, that's leaving a lot up to chance, because oftentimes at this point, only experts in our field are actually going to be able to put that together, agree with our assumptions, and understand this from the beginning. So what we want to do there is take that chance out, and we want to make sure that the beginning of our abstract is accessible to any reader and not just experts in our field. And we're going to do that by setting it up at the very beginning with something that we're sure everybody can agree on, not just us and not just people in our field. So instead of starting with knowing that, everybody understands we need these new radar-based methods for bird migration, we're going to explain a little bit about why. And so this example is not on radar-based methods for bird migration, but if we look at this abstract, we can see that this first sentence here uses something that every reader is going to be able to relate to. Everybody is going to be able to read this and understand and agree with you as a writer that this is something that is important. And this is what we want to do in our own abstract. We want to look at that first sentence we have written, and we want to understand if we think everybody is going to agree with us here, or maybe just people in our field. Now, before we go on to how to fix this, we're going to look at an introduction, because we're going to have the same thing here. Now, not just the first sentence though, usually it is the first paragraph of an introduction that conveys to the reader why we need to do this work. And so the way that I want my readers to think about this now here as well, the way to really help convey the importance of what we're doing is to set up at the beginning not just why our research project exists. This was the problem with the radar-based methods for bird migration. This was just setting up why the research exists. The first thing we want to set up is why our entire field of research exists. So before we get into the details of our specific project, we want to convey to the reader why our whole entire field exists. Why is it worth doing research on our specific field? If we're able to do this, we're going to fix this problem of relating to the reader at the beginning. We're going to fix that problem of assuming that the reader is going to have the same assumptions that we do about what's important, what needs to be studied, and what we need to work on. So with our abstract and with our introduction, we are going to basically pretend like we are a toddler and back out our research by continuously asking ourselves why, until we come up with a reason that is a good enough reason that encompasses essentially answering the question, why does our field of research exist? So doing this and diagnosing this and working on this yourself, go back, look at your abstract, look at your introduction. See what your first sentence of your abstract or paragraph of your introduction looked like. Do you have this really dark green text, this really broad scope sort of setting up and explaining to the reader why your field exists. If you do not, this is what we're going to work on. We are going to address this like we are a toddler. So going back to the bird migration methods, when I was talking with a student in the workshop and he explained to me this was how he was opening his paper, we did this in person. And so he said, yeah, okay, it's important that we develop new radar-based methods for studying bird migration. And I went, is it though? Why? And he went, okay, well, knowing bird migration patterns are important. And I was like, okay, but here we're still in one of those assumptions because I don't see it. I don't see this important. So why? Why is this important? No joke. His answer here was because bird migration patterns are cool. And then I was like, ooh, are we sure? And so after this, I asked him again, I was like, why? Why are they cool? What are you learning from them that is so cool or so fascinating or so interesting to you? And here's where we have the aha moment when the student went, oh, right, yes, we actually use bird migration patterns to study the effect of climate change on different species. And I was like, bingo, there we go. This is the information that we needed. So here, everybody who reads your paper is going to be able to agree that it is important to monitor and measure the effects of climate change on different species around the planet. And so if we can back our problem out to that, that is something that more people at least, are going to agree with you on, are going to see that assumption. So starting your paper with the assumption that this is something important to do is going to capture more readers. So this is what we want. This is the exercise I want you doing to fix both your abstract and your introduction of your paper, making sure that they're sufficiently related to the reader. The next place I want you to look in your papers for relating to the reader, conveying the importance of your work, is again back to the conclusion. So just like we did in the last video, we're going to look at that last paragraph of our discussion or our conclusion section. And just like in the last video, we want to make sure then that this is just very forward thinking, that we're showing the reader again, a so what? Why is this work important? And we can actually use this conclusion to go back and relate a bit to the problems that we brought up for the reader in both the abstract and in the introduction. So if we can show the reader what steps our work takes towards those problems that we brought up in those other sections, then we can go a very long way towards convincing the reader of why this work is important, why this work deserves to be published. The way I want you to do this is look at your conclusion. If your conclusion is not forward thinking, it's pretty much always then going to be a summary of your work. So I'm not going to again cover here why I don't want this to be a summary of your work. Please go watch the video of a breakdown on a discussion that I have linked to here below so that you can learn all about that in great detail. Here instead, I'm just going to talk about why I want your conclusion to be forward thinking to make sure you're conveying the importance of your work to your reader. So here, if it's not a summary, you're probably already doing a good job of putting in some forward-thinking statements, answering some questions to the reader about, so what, why this work deserves to be published. But here now, I also want you to go back and read what you wrote for relating to your reader in the abstract and introduction and address that again here in your conclusion. So just like we sort of did on a micro scale in the third video or the last video here, where we had direct statements of so what at the end of the introduction abstract, we're going to sort of do that on a macro scale here in the discussion. So instead of having one sentence at the end of the paper, we're going to have that final paragraph sort of help bring the entire story full circle and relate to those problems that you brought up at the beginning of the introduction. We don't just want to have them at the introduction and drop them. We want to sort of try to fold them in at the end and paint a picture for the reader of how far we have moved or how far our work has sort of progressed along these lines. So if you want to help beef up your conclusion a little bit here, if you want to make a stronger conclusion, I have a couple of key points here that you can use to brainstorm what to include in your conclusion. First, what specifically does your research do to advance science? What exactly does your research bring to the field? How has it advanced the field? What can be built, made, done, calculated now that your work exists and is out there in the world? How might your research be expanded upon in the future? And finally, my two favorite questions: why might scientists be excited about this work? And why might non-scientists be excited about this work? If you can answer those two questions in your conclusion, you've already come a long way. Again though, take these, use these as brainstorming, try to relate it back towards the first questions that you asked in the introduction of your paper to bring this full circle. And if you're able to do this, you will have come a huge long way towards making your paper accessible to the reader and making sure that the reader is able to understand the importance of your work. And then finally, a quick note here on grant proposals. If you're writing a grant proposal, lucky you, the information that I'm giving you here for research papers is exactly the same. You still want to address a big overarching problem at the beginning of your abstract in a grant proposal, the beginning of your introduction of a grant proposal. So don't just start the grant proposal with why this project. We want to start the grant proposal with why this field first, and then why this project, just like we do in a research paper. Finally, also with your grant proposal, you want to have some kind of conclusion that will bring this full circle for the reader. I know that in a grant proposal you haven't done the work yet, but here is where you will just speculate instead. So instead of saying how your work advanced the field, you're going to explain to the reader how you think your work is going to advance the field. Or you can say, if this project works, this is what we expect to get from it, or this is, what we expect to see. And that there can tell the reader exactly why this project would be worth funding. If you can paint them a picture in the conclusion of what the world would look like with your research, again, relating it full circle to the problems that you bring up in the beginning, you're here as well in your grant proposal going to go a very long way towards conveying the importance of your work, why your work should be published, and why your work should be funded. So if you have any questions here, any more concerns, feel free to leave a comment below and I'll be sure to answer you. Otherwise, hopefully by now, you're feeling really good about conveying the importance of your work to your reader, but we still have one video left. So please subscribe so that you get notified when our next video is released. See you soon and happy writing.